And welcome to our New Wine Church Planting podcast. We're here at New Wine Breaks Out to introduce this new podcast to you. We're really thrilled that you're joining us, and we've got on our podcast today Gareth Robinson, John McGinley, Wole, Agbage, and my name is Hannah Patton. They will be introducing themselves a little bit more as we go through the session. But we don't want to just restrict this seminar, this podcast to those who are planting churches already. We want you to feel that you can make your home here. If you are feeling stirred by God to gather people intentionally in order to serve the mission of Jesus in the world, to build his kingdom. So even if you are just dreaming or thinking or having a little go, dabbling your feet in the water of what might be called church planting, we want you to feel really welcome here. As we go through, we want this to be a journey that we go on together. Throughout the months that this podcast is going to be broadcast, we'd love to hear from you. And at the end of the session, Gareth's going to share a little bit about how you can get in touch and join in with the conversation. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Wole, who's going to introduce himself to us. Wole, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wole Agbage, and I am a church planter, and I lead a church called Imprint Church, and we have plants both in Leicester and London.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wole. Gareth, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gareth Robinson. I planted with my wife Lizzie, St Philip's Chapel Street, which is in the centre of Manchester in Salford, about 4 years ago nearly. And before that, we'd planted a church in Stockport on a deprived urban estate. And before that, I was a worship leader, but we were doing missional community stuff and had led various things both in Sheffield in the UK and in the US, where we lived for 5 years. And I've been the head of church planting for a little while at New Wine. So this is super exciting for me. I'm really excited to be doing the podcast with you all. And excited also to be sharing that role of heading up church planting now with John, who I'm sure will talk more about it. But if there are 4 Ds in church planting within the New Wine family, there's the dreamers, those people who long to go for it and do it, but they're not yet doing it. There's the doers, people like myself and Hannah and Wole, who are on the ground planting. There's the donors, the people who have the churches who are then planting the churches out of that mother church. And then there's the directors, those people working perhaps more strategically within their denomination to try and encourage church planting. So my role more and more has become focusing on the dreamers and the doers. And I'll let John explain a little bit more about what he does when he introduces himself. But it's great to be here. I've got 3 kids, Daisy, Lucy and Toby, who all love coming to New Wine. So we're all gutted not to be there physically, but it's great to be here online with you guys. Brilliant.
Thanks so much, Gareth. John, would you like to introduce yourself over in aircraft control over there?
Thank you very much. Just trying to look the part.
Brilliant.
So I'm based in Leicester, where I have been involved in leading Holy Trinity Leicester for the last 11 years. But way back in the annals of time, I planted a church 24 years ago. How old are you, Wole?
I am 25 years old.
There you go. So when Wole was 1 year old, I planted a church. I took a small team from Holy Trinity, Holy Trinity Hounslow, to plant just half a mile up a road. But as a result of planting into this redundant church building, we saw the community grow to about 150 people. We saw people baptized from every other faith background in the UK, and so many different cultures there, 35 different nationalities in this rich community, and just cut my teeth on just seeing a new community birthed that saw people come to know Jesus and really began to connect with its context and look like its context in Hounslow West. And so that was where I just saw the potential of church planting. And since then, God's really taken me on a journey around discipleship, because actually the Bible doesn't tell us to plant churches, it teaches us to make disciples. And so exploring cell church, and now at Holy Trinity, we've done missional communities for the last 10 years, and just exploring how do we put mission at the center of our discipleship and our relationships. And that's been really exciting. And then 6 years ago, one of those missional communities planted into an existing church building to revitalize that church. We'd felt a call to this for a number of years, but in our denomination, the diocese had frustrated those plans for a few years. But then we got that opportunity, and that church planted, and they grew. And then we have just seen them begin to make plans to plant again from that church plant, which is really exciting. And then a couple of years after that, 3 years ago, we again felt God stir us again to plant, and Wole was sent with a team to plant Imprint Leicester. And as he said, we've then seen them plant again into London from Leicester. And at the same time as the Imprint went, we then sent another team with a curate to go and plant into another church that needed revitalizing. And alongside of this, we've done some pioneering. So we've sent pioneers into a couple of churches. So we're really in that donor category that Gareth was talking about, and I hope I'll bring some reflections from that perspective. But it's been an amazing journey over the past 25 years.
Brilliant.
Well, I think you should say a bit more, mate.
Yeah,
you didn't say
I was
very
thinking
much.
the same.
Yeah. Sorry about that. But yeah, so I planted Imprint Church Leicester outside, actually from Holy Trinity Leicester. And I actually started Imprint Church Leicester with a group of friends. There was like 6 of us on team. And I remember we used to have like our services downstairs in this old pub. And it was really just a great experience, just growing from a small community. And I remember one of the first services where there wasn't much people, there was maybe like 10 people in the room. I asked the Lord and I said, God, why are you calling us to start a church plant? Why are you calling us to start Imprint Church Leicester? There's so many great churches. And I remember as I was preaching, thinking about the other churches that these guys could go to and stuff. And the Lord just said to me that there's many people in this city that haven't found a spiritual home. And we saw that to be true, especially just over the upcoming months where our community just grew every week, and where we started discerning and getting prophetic words about planting into London just 8 months later. And it was a really big step for us, but we really felt like the call of the Lord. So we had one of our events, which is a gospel showcase in London, which is like an evangelistic production. And we had it in London, and that basically enabled us to meet people of peace in London, where we developed small groups in London that eventually grew over that year, where we were able to actually plant a Sunday context. So I'm now based in London. I'm in Imprint Church London. And yeah, I'm just really thankful for all the prophetic words, and especially for my team in being so brave to step out to plant so quickly again.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love the emphasis on creativity and what you're doing. I just think that is so powerful and really close to the heart of God.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Well, my name's Hannah Patton. I lead a church up in a town called Wole, which is in the East Riding of Yorkshire. My husband Johnny and I came here about a year ago now, and the vision is to be a resourcing church, and part of that vision is planting churches. We've got a couple of thoughts on how we might do that. One is to look at planting individual congregations that we will continue to resource. So we'll kind of keep them under the wing, but allow them to do what they need to do in their own locality. And the other is to plant congregations who will be released to stand alone and be a bit more autonomous. So we are really in the first stages at the moment here in Wole. We're building relationships with our community. We're getting to know the town. We're trying to pray into what opportunities God might be asking us to step into, and seeing where he's going to lead. So we are right at the beginning of our journey of church planting, and so far it's been the best journey ever. It's been fantastic. We've loved every minute of it. So we thought that it would be quite fun as a first kind of step into this podcast to share a little bit of the challenges and sometimes the failures of the journey in church planting. We want to be honest. We want to be open. We don't want to paint a picture that's not realistic. So we thought that what we'd do for this first session is to start with the question, if only I'd known, if only I had known. Now, for me, often at the moment in lockdown, that question is about, if only I'd known that it was forecast to be rain before I hung the washing on the line, I wouldn't have done it. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking at here on this podcast. If only I'd known, what would it have been helpful to know as you started out or at a certain point along the journey? So we're going to hear from each of us what their if only I'd known scenario is, and then we're just going to have a conversation and a chat around that. Gareth, we're going to ask you to go first. What is your if only I'd known scenario?
So my if only I'd known centers around developing culture within the church that you are planting. And the reason it's quite hard to encapsulate in a short if only I'd known, because it comes out of having planted two quite different churches in two very different ways. The first church that we planted in Offerton, a little town just outside Stockport, we planted in our conservatory, in our house that the mother church had bought for us. The donor church had got us this lovely house that was very close to this estate where we were planting. We had a few people move in. There was a really small team of about 5 that grew to about 7 or 8 that grew to about 10 to 12. And we weren't doing public worship. What we were doing was every Thursday evening we were gathering in our home to pray and share how we were doing. And Lizzie and I were doing some teaching and just sort of sharing the heart of, look, this is how we follow Jesus, and this is how we're aiming to build the church community as we see people start coming to faith. And it wasn't for another 12 months then until we started doing public worship. So we had 12 months of Thursday evenings and then Sunday afternoon just in our conservatory. And we got to the point where we outgrew our conservatory. So suddenly we started looking for somewhere we could meet, which ended up being the primary school on the estate. So for us, we had that year of meeting twice a week, of learning what it means to pray for one another, support one another, be disciples of Jesus, learning what it means in worship, to use the gifts of the Spirit, to share with one another. So for us there, we knew the theory that culture is both caught and taught, right? So people see what it is that you do, and they're able to then model their lives around the pattern that you're living. And I'll probably bore people to death through this podcast talking about principles and patterns, because that's my thing. I've just finally finished writing a book about the principles of planting, the 5 characteristics of the leader, and the 5 steps from vision to multiplication. But then they've got to be worked out in practice. Like, what does that actually look like? And having that year of, hey, these are the principles and this is the practice, gave us a year to both teach and allow people to be with us and catch what it was that we were dreaming about building into the culture of our church. Now, contrast that with planting St. Philip's Chapel Street, which was, like Hannah, a resource church. It was the first resource church that was not being planted in partnership with HTB. It was in partnership with New Wine. HTB were massively generous in helping us learn all sorts of things about what they'd encountered, and spent some time with some of those leaders, and really, really helpful. But I was licensed on the Tuesday, and then we started public worship on the Sunday. And all we had time to do was gather the staff team that we'd had a couple of vision sessions with, and a few people, like one couple in particular, when we got prayed for at United in the summer, a couple came to talk to us and they ended up joining our church. So we had a few people who were coming to be part of our team. So we planted with 23 people, 9 children and 14 adults. And we didn't really have a lot of time to build that same culture where people could be caught and taught through what it is that we were doing. And I think our learning is we got so busy with what it is that we were then trying to do that we assumed we were enabling people to both hear what it was that we were teaching in terms of what it means to be a disciple and follow Jesus, and also then what it looks like in our home. It's much harder in a big city. We didn't live just around the corner from people, so people couldn't just pop in like we'd had back in Offerton. And looking back, probably I wish we'd been a bit more intentional about creating time. We had plenty of team time, but a lot of the team time was just like, oh my goodness, there's an awful lot to do. We've got a £10 million Georgian building that we don't really know how to sort out because we haven't got any money, and how are we going to get this done? And that was the conversation, rather than what is it that culturally we're trying to do within our church community. So for one example, we talked with one couple and said, hey, we want to do this thing and we want to do community together. And they were like, yeah, we want to do community together. And they joined the team. And it turned out that their understanding of the word community was quite different to our understanding of the word community. So we didn't really do community together in the way that Lizzie and I thought we were going to. And when we then tried to start sharing, hey, this is kind of what we meant, it didn't go down brilliantly well, because they were like, well, yeah, but this is what we think community is. And so without setting the foundation of expectations, those principles and practices, it became harder to build that culture that back in Offerton was easier to build, because we'd had a year to do it before we started doing anything public. So I think that's I wish I'd known. I wish I'd known that I needed to be much more intentional about helping build culture.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you've got the comparison between two really different experiences in that kind of how the church has kind of come into life and come into being. Let's pick that apart a little bit. Any thoughts, any offerings on growing culture? What does that look like? What does it even mean, growing and setting culture?
Yeah, I was wondering why you think it's so important, Gareth, because obviously it's a little bit difficult when you don't quite see eye to eye with team, but you can still get on and run Sundays. And what I loved about what you were sort of hinting at and just beginning to explore is that the church that you're planting doesn't just come out of the delivery of events, but it comes out of something of who you are as a team at the heart of it. And I was just really interested in that and why that's so important.
That was a wrong time to drink some coffee.
I love that. I did think that, I must say. Oh, that's
hey,
brave.
Live, everyone.
That's a brave sip.
I think because when you plant a church, you are inheriting other people's understanding of what church is. When you're planting with a team. So we didn't plant with a team from a mother church. We'd actually said to our church back in Offerton, like, you're not allowed to come because what's happening here is so valuable and effectively so dependent on the team that's been built that we don't want to decimate what God's doing here for the sake of what God might do here. So we were gathering people who had all sorts of different understandings of even what the word church means. And then gathering people from other churches who are saying, oh, well, maybe we might like to join with you. And we tried to do vision evenings and we tried to set the culture. But I think I've learned that setting culture doesn't happen in an hour on a Sunday evening when you're welcoming people into your community. It happens by doing life on life stuff. And I think it comes back really, John, to what you were saying about being disciples, and that's Lizzie's and my understanding of it, of how do we grow together, how do we share one another's life in that depth of vulnerability, which if you've not been part of a church where that's normal, then that can be really difficult to own. You're like, well, I thought it was all about, as you say, doing Sunday, and we're doing Sunday really well, so what's the matter? Because the reason it's so important is because of people who will get discipled when they're coming to faith. That's obviously the reason we're planting churches. It's not just to give people a slightly better, nuanced version of the church that they like and they've moved to a new city, but actually we're here to seek and save the lost, and discipling people when they come to faith so that they understand that church isn't just about what you do on a Sunday, but church is about how we live our lives and how the Holy Spirit moves through us during the week with our colleagues or our neighbours and friends. All of that stuff comes out of culture. And so it's got to be there within the team. And I'm not saying we did a terrible job of it. I'm just saying I think we could have done more. And on reflection, I think we have to be much more intentional than Lizzie and I thought. It's not just caught, it has to be taught as well. And that's what discipleship's all about, isn't it? It's about learning. The word disciple means learner. So if we're learning from Jesus, then usually we see that modeled in other people. And so we're seeking to learn from them. So how do we as church planters give people something to learn from, both in the way that we live and also explaining why we're living out that way? So, yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question, actually?
Yeah.
So I remember a great leader told me his name is Eduardo of Dunamis, which is a great ministry in Brazil. He basically said, when it comes to culture, he says you have to be really protective, especially in a church community. And he said that be intentional in encouraging and honoring things that align with your culture. And he said, fiercely come against those things that you don't want to see in your culture and doesn't align with the culture of the church. And a quick question, was there anything in particular that you felt like I have to come against? Because if I don't come against this, then perhaps it might have a detrimental effect on our culture on large.
That's an interesting question. If you ask me in about a year's time, I'll probably be able to say, oh yeah, this is what, because I think you reflect on those things and think, yeah, I did actually need to oppose it. I did oppose it and I needed to. Something Lizzie and I have reflected on is that we're more intuitive leaders. And that's both a blessing, but can also be a bit of a challenge sometime to some people who are more used to structured, planned ways of doing things. If I'm honest, I can't think of a particular example right now, but I do know that when you do that, you can end up looking controlling. And that's a really challenging area for any leader to be able to defend the culture that you're trying to establish, especially when you have other people who are who have their own idea about what it should be and how it should work, and trying to keep those open lines of communication so that those people feel like they've been heard, but also so you can say, well, okay, thanks, but actually this is what we're trying to do. And so that's where the vision piece is really important, the teaching. So yeah, you can see what it is that we're doing, but actually this is why we're doing it. Yeah, so I think communication is really important. But yeah, being aware that you could be accused of being controlling if you're trying to say, no, that's not how we're going to do it here.
Thank you. I wonder whether culture might be something that we revisit as we go along with the podcast. I think it's really key and quite core to what we're doing as we're planting churches and growing communities. If you do have any questions or anything that just sparks a thought and you'd like to just explore that a bit more, then we will be giving you ways of getting in touch at the end of the podcast, and we can hopefully explore these themes a little bit more as we journey on through the year. Wole, we're going to turn to you now. What is your if only I'd known scenario?
Yeah, for me, when I was thinking about this, I was actually thinking, I wish I knew how practical being a church planter is. And I think I had a lot of great spiritual input, a lot of great prophetic words, people that showed me the ins and out of pastoral ministry and stuff, and prayer ministry and everything like that. But I literally remember the first week of our Sunday service, I think it was like a Tuesday, and our service was going to be later on in that week, our first ever service. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, we have a Sunday service and I don't know how to set up a microphone. That reality hit me that we could have a service and there could be no sound. So I remember sitting down in the church, and I got like an XLR cable, and I was like, okay, I think this is an XLR cable. I got out the mixer, and I literally just went on YouTube. So YouTube is literally my co-planter. It's taught me so much.
Oh, I love it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I went on YouTube. I just learned how to like set up a PA system and stuff. And And I think even little things like, where do you get a baptismal pool from?
Mm.
And I'm so thankful for like the various churches that we've had to that we've actually been able to get a baptismal pool from, because we didn't have our own. And I remember even in London when we went to go and borrow a baptismal pool from another church, the operations manager actually didn't know how to set up the baptismal pool, and I had no idea how to set up the baptismal pool. And then they actually had to call the lead church planter, and he knew how to do it, and he showed me how to set it up. And I remember I had my intern next to me, and I said to him, "You see, he's a real church planter."
It's a good problem to have, though, not
Yeah.
needing a baptismal pool in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great place to be.
Yeah,
Definitely.
good call,
But I guess like, especially just as a rookie, I didn't know that you have to heat up the baptismal pool. Like
Yeah.
like a day
Brilliant.
before. So yeah, people are just being baptized in very lukewarm water. But they were really gracious. They were really gracious. So yeah, just those practicalities. And one thing that I am really grateful for is that I feel like we started off in such a humble state. It's not like we had like a building or like so many resources and stuff. And I really thank God that we started off like that, because I feel like if our community started off with everything off the checklist and stuff, and everything that, you know, people say we need to start a church plant, I would be telling people that in order for you to have a successful church plant, you need to have a salaried team, you need to have a building, you need to have so-and-so thousands in the account and stuff. And I'm happy I can comfortably tell people that it literally is the grace of God and trusting God and following his leadings.
And
so
YouTube.
And YouTube. So yeah, I'm really thankful for that. And I honestly feel like it's created a really good team structure, because especially like we don't have like a salary team. I think in both Leicester and we are the only guys who are salaried, is that a term? Yeah, but who are paid by the church, and we have interns as well. So it means that our core team all work 9 to 5s, and even in where we are in Bank, my core team literally work like in a mile radius. They work like literally down the road and stuff. So they're literally coming to church right after their working hours in their seats and stuff. And I feel like we've really seen so much commitment. And it meant that I had to quickly devolve responsibility, and our teams had to grow quickly. And I feel like if that wasn't our framework, if we had a team who was perhaps 9 to 5, then our team probably would have become like the limiting factor in the church. And I feel like you do see that in a lot of communities where the onus is on the team that's paid, where they just have to do everything, where because you are paid worship pastor, you're the only person that gets to do worship, or you know that yeah, the responsibility is just on you. And that kind of falls in so many different areas. So because we didn't have the option to do that, I feel like it really became beneficial to us, because it meant that we got to get so many people involved. Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's so good, Wole. And it makes me think of something that Alan Hirsch talks about in his movement principles around you need community and you need liminality. He's always very technical.
I love that. I love it.
But it's on the edge. It's when you're on the edge of something and you're under pressure and you don't have everything sorted out, that it forms this community, and it then causes you to find the way forward and what God has, and it really deepens that depth of commitment. So in the light of the positives that came out of that, would you have done anything differently in terms of people who are thinking about forming a church planting team? Would you suggest that they think about those technical aspects, the practical aspects, as not in terms of necessary paid staff, but in terms of the experience and the abilities within the team that's going to start the church with them?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially being a church where we want to continue church planting, I think it will be great to actually tell like future church planters just like some of the technicalities as well. And I, like I said before, like I saw like a great emphasis on the spirituality and pastoral care, but I think it's actually the technicalities that could be more burdensome to a church planter and stuff. Like especially if you've been trained in theology and stuff, and you kind of know how to create a sermon and to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit and stuff, but perhaps you don't know those things. And I'm happy, like obviously like I had amazing support from Holy Trinity, but I think there was a lot of things that I had to learn in the process, like on the go. And I think I would just, if I were just to tell anyone in the future, it's that there's things that need to be sorted out beforehand. Yeah.
I think, Wole, you've modelled something that's really important though for somebody pioneering something fresh, which is that you don't always know the skills that you need before you get there.
Yeah.
And certainly that's been my experience. Like the skills you need to be able to look after a Jordan building are utterly different. You need to set up church every week in a community centre, which is what we were doing just before we moved here. And, you know, we thought, oh, crumbs, putting the chairs out every week in a community centre, that's hard work. Well, it turns out that looking after a big old building's pretty hard work as well. And I don't think you can always... you can't always know the skills that you might need. But I just love your attitude of, all right, well, I'm going to try and learn how to do it then. Because I think that's a real quality of somebody who's moving from that dreamer to doer category, that, you know, if you're a can-do person, then you just know you've got to get it done. But what other things have you used other than YouTube to develop some of those skills that you might wish that you'd had, but then discovered you didn't? Like, how does that work for you other than YouTube?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one thing we definitely had access to, I guess me personally and me as a church, is that we knew lots of different people and stuff. And even being greatly connected to Holy Trinity Leicester, we were able to like ask so many questions. And I'm the type of person that if I don't understand something, I will sit down with you until I understand it and stuff. So people who are experts in different fields, and even being in London, especially in bank, there's so many things I didn't know. But I would sit down with people who are experts in finance, or people who are experts in sound, and literally say, what do you recommend? So even if I visit other churches, I remember visiting Christchurch Spitalfields, and I saw a flight case and I was like, why did you buy that particular flight case? And what's good about it? Tell me about the mobility and stuff. And I think it's just that thing of constantly trying to educate yourself and being proactive in that as well.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the joys for me of coming to this place of, you know, church planting and church leadership, is actually giving myself permission to learn. It's a real joy. You don't have to have all the answers. And even those little conversations are part of the process, aren't they? You know, learning from someone, you can just have such a great time with someone when you're learning from them. It's great. Really good. Right, we're going to hand over to John. John, you're going to share with us, what is your if only I'd known scenario?
Yeah, thank you. And before I just do that, I just say, Wole, you presume that actually a load of people know how to do the prayer and the following of the Holy Spirit and allowing God to lead and empower the team. I think that actually that's another thing we should pick up in the future in the podcast, because you've really just put that front and center of all that you've done. And it's just been a joy for me to watch how you have just stepped out on how God is leading you. And I think that's such a thing, particularly for us at New Wine, that we want to prioritize. So well done.
Come on.
Thank you so much.
In terms of what I wish I'd known, provocatively, if I describe it as, I wish I'd known how needy church planters were. But in a kinder way, what I'd like to say is I wish I'd realized just how costly it is for people to plant a church, just how much effort it takes, and stepping out, and the pressures that they face, and the different aspects that we've already reflected on that people need to address. and the need for supporting them. And so as we've sent people from Holy Trinity, we've done that with faith, we've done that with great excitement, we've cheered them on. But one of the learning lessons I've had as a donor church is I really need to step up more in being generous, and we need to learn how to go on this journey of generosity as a church, because as the sending church, you think that you're being generous, and you are. And so you try and send people, and you're often sending your best people. Lizzie Wole said in a recent discussion group I was in, I've stopped telling my church that we're sending the best because it doesn't do very well for the people left behind. But often it is the people who go who will carry the calling and the gifting, and it's so painful to see them go. And then you're sending with them their giving, you're sending finance, you're trying to make available to the team that's going your support structures from your office and functions and all the other things that we can do to support them. And yet, even though it feels really generous from our point of view, what I didn't realize was just how costly and pressured the church planter feels, and all that they're having to cope with. As somebody said, church planting is like flying the plane while you're building it. You've got off the ground, but you've no idea if this thing will keep flying, and you've no idea how you're going to land it, and you're having to just build it all the time. And the pressure that brings, the new skills, as Wole was saying, that you have to learn. There's so much that is put upon that lead of that plant. And certainly what I've been learning is thinking, how do we now be much more intentional about, for me as a sending church leader, how do I support that person personally so that they know they've got permission to come and ask, as Wole was saying. How do I create the culture in my team that when the church planter comes asking for support, that they actually support them? I know that there was a couple of moments for Wole where some of my team weren't as generous as I'd want them to be with equipment and room hire and stuff like that. And so, yeah, just trying to grow in generosity and realize what the plant needs and to put that in place right from the beginning. So as we've gone on, we've learned how to do that. Gareth mentioned buildings. One of our team, our operations manager, is project managing the building development for the church plant that we planted. And so it's things like that actually learning that there's a reason why God's put us in relationship as sending churches and plants, and we can miss that, and we need to learn how to really release what God's wanting to through those relationships, whilst at the same time not being controlling and trying to impose upon the plant things that we expect of them, because they've come from us, because God's calling them into something that is unique, and they need the freedom and creativity to be released into that. So yeah, I hope that's helpful just in terms of from a sending church point of view of some of the stuff that we've been learning.
Yeah, I wonder if you could kind of unpick in a kind of more practical way, how does that affect your diary, like how you're allocating your time when you're planting churches and thinking about all these different people that you're needing to support?
Yeah, I think that's again something that I was doing intuitively and responsively initially, but now what we're looking at is specific time with the church plant lead in terms of a mentoring relationship. We're looking at establishing a mentoring group in Leicester to enable that to come together for shared experience. We specifically put into our senior leadership team time for the wider family of Holy Trinity churches, so that when we were meeting together, we weren't just talking about what Holy Trinity was doing, but we were then beginning to talk proactively about what we need to do to support others, what the needs of each of the plants was, where they were at, and how we could support them. And so, yeah, there's really clear things that we can diarize, as you suggest, Hannah, and just structure, so that the structures give permission for the stuff to grow that needs to be grow within them. Whereas I think that if we hadn't, well, we didn't early on structure it, and then I think, you end up with Wole sitting learning from YouTube in the building when there's somebody who knows how to set up a PA system. That the result was that he didn't feel he had the permission to come. And I think that's a really helpful just illustration of, because it wasn't structured, actually there wasn't the freedom to go and access all that he could have accessed. So I think that's spot on. We're learning to structure that ongoing relationship and to think about what it means to be in a family of churches together.
Great.
And how do you think you balance that? I suppose it has to be an offer of a relationship, but how do you balance offering that relationship without being the controlling mother church? You're like, get lost, mum, I want to do this on my own. You know, we've all had the teenage tantrums ourselves. We've lived through that. We just want to get on and do it ourselves. How do you get that balance right?
That's why Wole didn't talk to me for 6 months. No, he didn't do that at all. But I think I got it wrong in that I thought that what my job was to release. And so I stepped back. And so, yeah, one of the first church plant that I did, the leader there said, John, can I have a bit more support? You know, it just feels like you've dropped me. And that wasn't intentional. That was genuinely just to say, I don't want to be the controlling mother church that is trying to tell you how to do things, because I want you to find the way that you're called to do them.
Yeah.
But I just got that wrong. So I think that I think I got the attitude right, which was, I'm wanting to release these guys. I want them to do better than we're ever doing. And I'm so excited that church has become, in the Church of England, a resourcing church, and they've got planting plans and they've got a vision for all of that. So I'm thrilled with that. But in coming out of that attitude, I think I then should have said, what would be a helpful structure for how often we meet up, and for how we can support you, and what ongoing support do you need on the basis of the needs you've got, such as with buildings and practical stuff, as well as with the spiritual stuff. So I think having the attitude that you're wanting to release then gives you the permission to say, let's put this in place and structure it. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, that's what I've learned over the last experiences.
Can I ask a question? So, but what about in terms of protecting yourself? Like, I know it's definitely important to sow into people and stuff. And like, even in my community, I'm sowing into people, but I can definitely see like sometimes how exhausting and time consuming it can be. So how do you form like your own limit? Like, how do you know, okay, this is when I need to do it and stuff?
Why don't one of you other two answer that?
I mean, I guess for me, I'm very early stages, but I'm thinking at the moment, particularly, I've got the pressures of, you know, both myself and my husband working full time, but we've also got kids. So we're trying to balance everything, and they're not full time back at nursery yet. So our time is really limited, and I'm starting to think, what do I need to do, but what can I release other people to do? And so looking at that kind of cascading, multiplying model in everything that we're doing, so it doesn't all come to me. So with my team, how can I raise them up, but how then can they be raising the next kind of generation of leaders? So I think, I don't know, I guess for me at the very early stages, I'm thinking, how can I put those things into place, those structures into place, that it's not all about what I can do, but how can the rest of my team, when it comes to planting, how can the rest of the team support the planters, so it's not all my job?
And have you ever like supported someone that didn't want your support? how do you navigate that?
I'm living that at the moment, and it's one of those painful situations where you have great dreams and hopes, but that relationship just has not worked out. And so, yeah, I think that Paul and Barnabas and John Mark, they had that experience, and we're just using the denominational support just to work that out, and in no way saying who's right or wrong, but just saying, I'm not sure that this can continue. And so that means that one of our hopes for a church plant has just been put on pause, and we're just working that out, because in this sense of God calling, the relationships are so important. They have to take a lot of weight, and if they don't stand up to that weight, then for us that brings us to a really painful realization where we go, actually, we can't carry on together. and we long to, and we both wanted to, but it's not going to work out in this short term. And so I think that's helpful just to recognize that there's not going to be nice, glorious stories in everything that you're trying to start. There are challenges in this.
Yeah. And amazing discussion, and some of the questions around time management of how we invest in people kind of links, Hannah, to your scenario, if only you'd known. So do you want to launch into
Thanks.
that?
That was a great segue.
Did you like what I did there?
Oh, it was good. It was really good. So my scenario is I'm fairly new to being leading a church, and I think for me, if only I'd known that I would need to kind of take so much time to pray, to plan, to dream. I think stepping into a role which is the next level up is always quite a experience of learning a lot. And for me, a lot of it's about giving myself permission to be in that role, and that actually that the role of a church leader is quite distinctive. So you are having to lead, and you are having to grow a vision, and you are having to work out how to take people with you, what the next steps are, things like preaching series, planning those, how to raise people up, who to raise up, how to invest in them, how to disciple. All of that takes time and reflection. I think especially at the moment, being in lockdown, having paused everything that's happening in our church buildings, but seeing loads of growth, growth of different types, but a lot of growth actually in different ways, discipleship, new people making steps on their faith journey. But the pressure is to kind of think, when are we going to start back in our building? What, how's it going to look? What are you doing? You're on social media, you're thinking, oh, what's everyone else doing? Am I going to be left behind? Am I doing the wrong thing? All of those decisions take a lot of time, a lot of reflection, a lot of just kind of carving that time out with God, seeking, like Wole does so well in what he's doing, seeking God. What is God leading me in? What's he speaking into this situation? What's going to be best for our town from a kingdom perspective? So I think, I'm a year in, and I'm learning just how much time I need, and that it's a legitimate use of time to be praying, and sitting with a empty notebook and allowing my pen just to kind of scrawl. That's all legitimate, and giving myself permission to do that, really.
I think the step up from being on a team to being the number one, especially when you're planting something new, is bigger than anyone anticipates.
Yeah.
That certainly was our experience. And we thought we were number ones back in Offerton, but actually we still had the covering of the mother church. The PCC was their PCC. They helped with all the finances. Suddenly coming here, we don't have anyone to go to in that same way, that same support. But Hannah, it'd be interesting. I'm just reflecting on what Wole was talking a little bit about, asking about too. How do you get the balance between you being the leader and setting the tone and saying, this is where we're going, and doing that more communal gathering of consensus and hearing what people have to say? Because that's a challenge as well, because it's great when you're the pioneer and you're just starting out and this is where we're going, and that's great, but you're a year in, you've got a community now, you've got people who have opinions and they have their perspectives. And so what be interesting to hear how you've made that balance work between being directive and making communal decisions as well.
I've been working with my coach on this actually, because it's a big deal to be leading a team, and I'm really wanting to invest a lot in our team. And so my coach has been helping me to work through some of the things. So for example, small groups, we're setting up small groups. I want to do it. Now I was going to the team and saying, okay, we want to set up small groups. What are your thoughts? And then I'd be met with this wall of silence. And then I was like, okay. And people weren't really sure what I was saying we are going to do, and what they've got kind of creative license to help form the vision. So my coach has been really helping me to kind of step into the things that I am discerning are the way we're going to go. For example, we are going to do small groups. And what my kind of bottom line is in, you know, with the leading of the Spirit, with consulting people, with learning and reading, where I would like to see it going. And then what are the things that are up for grabs? What are the things that we can be creative with? What are the things that I don't mind if the team wants to go in a different way? And actually just being clear on that has been helpful for the team. And then also going through a process, because I think I realized that I quite often have already been through the process and they haven't. So I come with an idea, and I do have a lot of ideas, and they can sometimes look a little bit shell-shocked or, you know, it's another idea. So actually for me, just planning and thinking, what's the process I'm going to go through with the team? How am I going to allow that process to take shape and be a little bit more hands-off and a little bit less directive? And you know, let's kind of go together. So I think one of the things for me has been much more planning than I had ever realized I'd needed. Planning every meeting, planning every question I ask the team, because when I don't plan it, I can tell that they don't respond in a way that's nearly as easy and helpful and conducive to doing something good.
That's really good. And just recognizing the value of spending that time doing the planning, because that helps you draw the best out of people.
Yeah.
So I think, you can easily feel guilty and overwhelmed by, well, there's all this need over here and there's all this stuff I should be doing. And how can I be spending time thinking through planning a meeting when I should be out there saving the lost? But it's sort of seeing the longer game, I guess, isn't it? And trying to invest in that way.
Yeah.
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that little nugget that you dropped in when I talked to my coach in terms of, and you said earlier that you really love the joy of learning new things. And yeah, I wonder again if it's another thing we should explore later on, but just the importance of just that external support and that mentoring and coaching. Certainly for me, I've looked for that all the time, and in the new role that I've got with New Wine and seeking to develop church planting across New Wine, I've gone and got a different coach because it's a different skill set and different experience, and just I think it's invaluable. Particularly as an extrovert, I just don't even know what I think until I've talked to somebody about it. And so I think you just got to know yourself. What have you, Hannah, or any of the others found useful in terms of coaching?
I mean, yeah, very briefly, I think the thing is for me is that actually employing a coach, and I do budget that into our church budget. That was a big step for me to actually take that to the PCC and the standing committee and say, can we put this in the budget because I need it. So employing a coach has been great because I know that person is just there for me. I don't even ask her how she is at the beginning of the session. Just like, I'm paying you to help me, to invest in me. I need it. And so that's been a big step, even going to, you know, making it a priority for myself, because I can just see the knock-on effects throughout the whole team in the church.
It's really good. Where are you, Wole?
Yeah, I think for me, I was just thinking about it, but I really had like great input from John McGinley himself and Simon Breaker, especially if we were going to like minister at another church, so like our road trips and stuff. And during those times, I could just ask endless questions, maybe because they're just in a car with me and I can't escape. But I really appreciate those moments, and some of those conversations have been so vital to my ministry and to my spiritual growth. And I think I was able to ask specific questions in a particular context, because it's not just like, you know, one size fits all when it comes to church planting. There's things that contextualize, and there's things that you have to answer based on the leading of the Spirit and also based on the context as well. And what I loved about, you know, these two figures of mine is that they kind of understood my context first of all, but as well as they had experience and they also could trust the leading of the Holy Spirit. So it was really direct and it was really helpful in many ways. Yeah.
Brilliant. Such a biblical thing, isn't it? Such a biblical model of learning. We are going to have to draw to a close. Believe it or not, 4 people who lead churches have talked too much, and we've only got a couple of minutes now to just finish. Gareth, give us a 30-second how we can get in touch. What's the next step after this?
Yeah, so this has been an hour-long special for everybody. The intention is going forward that we'll do 20 minutes to half an hour once a month as a regular podcast. And we would love to hear your questions. We'd love to hear where you're itching so that we can try scratching it. And the way to get in touch with us is to use the email churchplanting@new-wine.org, churchplanting@new-wine.org. And that will get through to lovely Carol, who will help us work out what best ways we can come up with answering some of those questions. And obviously we've got plenty of things that we want to think about and throw out as well, but keep an eye out. As soon as the podcast comes online, we'll let you know about that. If you've signed up to the Leaders Network and you've ticked that you're interested in church planting and pioneering, so you should be notified when it starts, so that you can subscribe and stay in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gareth. John, 30 seconds on what's happening in the New Wine Network with planting at the moment.
So we're trying to structure things so that Gareth and I, well, we don't have enough time to do everything across the country. So we're going to form church planting hub churches within the New Wine family. And so they will be announced at United Breaks Out. So do look for those after watching this seminar. And there should be a hub church nearer you or near to you, and then we're working with those leaders to create some resources in those locations, along with some training that will be online that Gareth will develop and will become available online. And so it'll happen so that it's accessible to everybody online, but we also want to create some key relationships locally around those hub churches, and we'll be developing resources that they will make available.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, John. Wole is going to finish by praying for us. Thanks, Wole.
Yeah, Father Lord, I thank you so much for this conversation. I thank you that we were able to honor you by focusing on our experiences and glorifying your name. And Father Lord, I thank you for the ideas that you are giving people, especially when it comes to church plant. I thank you for how you're strengthening people and how you're pouring out your wisdom and how you're pouring out your resources. And Father Lord, I just pray for those who are currently in church plants, who are perhaps in teams or leading communities. I just pray that you strengthen them right now in the name of Jesus. I pray that you bless them with wisdom in the name of Jesus. And I pray that you bless them with prophetic insight of what you're calling them to do. And I pray for those who perhaps you've just put ideas on their hearts, future communities on their hearts. I just pray that you will just continue to nurture that in the name of Jesus. That you continue to just cultivate the gift set and cultivate the dreams inside of them. And I thank you for everyone listening, and I just speak a blessing over them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for tuning in. We hope this has been helpful. We'll look forward to connecting with you at some point soon. Bye.